Hey there everybody, Thet here, and welcome to a tier list. Yes, a tier list of characters from Iratus, your minions, your little lads who are going to help you rule the world and kill it all, because life is a disease, as you see. Anyway, I've beaten Iratus a couple of times. I've played all of these minions quite a bit, put them in some different compositions, played them around with them a bit, seen where I liked them and where I didn't. And I'm gonna go ahead and rank them for you to see what you think of my particular preferences, which if you've been watching the series that had gone on, and you might have an idea of what I like and what I don't already, but this will go ahead and solidify it. As always, anytime anyone ever does a tier list, you have to make sure to let people know this is just my opinion. It's not the definitive ultimate tier list of Iratus, and if you're wrong, you don't know how to play the game, you need to get good and all that good stuff. No, this is just what I prefer, and these are the minions that, one, basically kind of fit into my playstyle, and two, that I think are fairly well designed and all that good stuff. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start at the beginning. So obviously S tier would mean they're one of my favorite minions. I would basically always have them in with a run unless I'm doing something just completely meanie. D tier would mean I don't think they fit in with anything in the game. I don't think they go well with any particular party, and even if they do, there are better combinations for everyone else in that party than this particular minion, things like that. So, and obviously as you go up the scale, the more I personally like them and the more I think they're effective. So starting off with the first one here, the Banshee. Banshee, totally stress focused. Lots of stress moves, also has a stance that affects enemies anytime they get moved around. I like that. It actually provides quite a bit of synergy with a lot of other classes, because a lot of other minions do have those push-pull mechanics in them. So I actually really like the Banshee. I like her strategy, and I kind of like any minion that also gives you mana, because that lets you go ahead and advance your magic strategies as well. So I'm going to go ahead and get the Banshee. I think I'm going to start the Banshee actually up in A tier. I think she's a really solid minion for basically any team that is not going to be 100% damage focused. If you want stress in there at all, the Banshee is a pretty good fit for your team. Let's see, who's next? The Blood Phantasm. So the Blood Phantasm has a good deal of attack power to her. Or him, I can't really tell. Not that it matters, I guess. They're dead. They probably won't be doing anything with any of the parts anyway. Unless the Necromancer's really weird. Anyway, basically mostly damage-based. Has some interesting support skills where they can buff another target, make it so they do damage if that target gets hit. They can heal everyone else based on taking damage. I actually think the Blood Phantasm actually synergizes very well with itself, with another Blood Phantasm, based on my gameplay at least. Works well with debuffs, so Blood Phantasm can work pretty well with other classes like the Mummy, who also gets more powerful with debuffs, and a couple others. I don't think the Blood Phantasm brings anything particularly special to the table. Decent damage, okay sustain. I would say, just based on who else I have on the list so far, Blood Phantasm is going to go in B, because it's not as good as the Banshee, and it wouldn't be one of my first go-to choices out of every minion on the list. If you put them all in front of me and said, okay, assemble a team, Blood Phantasm wouldn't be one of the first ones I go towards. Next up, we have the Bone Golem. I like tanks. I really like tanks. I think his tanking style is pretty neat. He can protect others. He can self-destruct if he's going to die soon, to do massive damage, of course. He can sustain himself by healing himself. His damage output is actually kind of solid, but it always feels weak. And that's probably because there are others that are just way beyond, especially after getting buffed a little bit. But I actually do think the Bone Golem is a very good class. He doesn't fit that well into any of my personal play styles. But I'm still having trouble between A and B, because I really do think he might be worthy of A tier. I think I think I'm going to put him in A tier. Had to have a think about it. I think he's also a really popular class as well. I haven't dug that deep into it, but his design is awesome. He's really effective at what he does. I just think the Banshee is probably a little bit better at what she does than the Bone Golem at what he does, but I think he's still plenty good enough to be a solid A tier pick. The Bride of Iratus. Shoot, man. Fantastic damage, mana regen, self-buff, which is amazing, a stance that damages enemies, which can synergize with the Banshee, can synergize with Wraith, can synergize with a lot of different classes. Her base damage is really solid. I have to put the Bride in S tier. I mean, her ultimate also just crits everyone. It's guaranteed damage right now. It might not be if they make a change so that blocks can also block crits, but right now it's literally guaranteed damage. She's just so good. If anything, her only downside is that she's kind of squishy, but who cares? If you're doing damage faster and harder than the opponent can, it doesn't matter how squishy you are. You're not the one that's going to be taking hits. And she's in the back anyway, so she's less likely to take hits anyway. I don't know. I think any party where you're going to want to do even a little bit of damage, she fits right in. And she even has a stress move. Not that it's her greatest move, but she has one. She can do solid stress damage. So she can even fit into a team of stress dealers and then provide crits for even more stress. She's a little nuts. That's what I'm trying to get at here. She's really good. The Dark Knight. I do really like the Dark Knight. The way that his armor and resistance buffs his attack power, I think, is excellent, and it synergizes perfectly with another class who's going to be coming up here in a little bit. Another minion toward the closer to the end of the list right now. Other than that, though, he gets buffs. Yeah, he's immune to crits, which is fantastic, and makes his armor all the better. However, other than that, he basically has stress damage, but I don't... And maybe I'm wrong on this, but I don't think he fits as well into a stress team as he does into a support team. A team who can buff him up, make him stronger, make him better. So that kind of makes him almost a 1 or 2 trick pony as far as abilities go, but it's a really good trick. I mean, you put him in the front line, you give him a couple of buffs, and if the enemies are all frontline hitters, your team is basically immune to damage, or at least very close to it. So I am going to go ahead and put the Dark Knight in A tier. I think he's just barely edged out of S tier because there are some teams that he really does not work. He won't work with as well. But he's a solid tank. Arguably better than the Bone Golem, but the Bone Golem has more utility to him compared to the Dark Knight. Alright, the Dampier. So the Dampier is a very interesting class, in my opinion. Can tear apart blocks, well, not blocks, armor, and can also tear apart resistance. Gets stronger as the battle goes on, as she takes damage, which is pretty neat. I don't think, though, yeah, the damage is okay. The riposte is nice, I will definitely say that. Could actually synergize very well with the Blood Phantasm. Encourage enemies to attack the Dampier and kind of have a team based around that. Interesting idea. I don't think I've actually tried building that team to see how good it would be. I think it would actually be all right. However, looking at everyone else in A tier and S tier, the Dampier definitely feels like a step down from these lads up here. But I don't think she's weak enough to go into C tier yet, which is going to land the Dampier directly into B tier. Moving on to the Unfrozen. Major damage, some magical, some physical, but he's basically damage focused. He can take care of traps, which is definitely a unique little extra ability here. I like him a bit. The Unfrozen is pretty cool, pun intended. Not really. However, again, looking at the A tier and the S tier, there's nothing that he really brings to the table that other classes don't bring, I think, a little bit better, other than the ability to destroy traps. but the ability to destroy traps isn't so awesome to really knock you up in the tiers here. He can also freeze allies, excuse me, to prevent damage and heal them, which I guess could be a really interesting sustain mechanic. However, if you're sustaining, you're not dealing damage, and I think I would rather deal damage than work with sustain. I think if some of the changes that the developers on Frozen, coincidence I'm sure, decide to make kind of boost up a tall play style where you want to have one team that's fully leveled up as opposed to having multiple teams, he could become more important than that because he could actually offer some sustain to the team. However, for now, I am going to go ahead and keep him in B tier, although I can see him rising up depending on what changes they end up making. The Ghoul. The Ghoul was the last one I unlocked, so I've had the least amount of playtime with her. However, I think she's very interesting. She definitely scales as the battle goes on. She gets a lot stronger. She has some insane self-sustain. And in fact, if she has someone else on the team who can sustain themselves as well, as in keeping their health up, keeping themselves alive, I think she could synergize greatly with them, based on what I've seen. She also does an absolutely baffling amount of damage. At least the potential for that damage is there. Totally. I really didn't think I would like the Ghoul as much as I did. Probably partially because it took so long to unlock her, but I actually think the Ghoul definitely belongs in A tier. Better definitely than everyone in B tier. Maybe not better in some... Well, right now everyone in A tier basically carries a different role than the Ghoul. The Ghoul is definitely damage focused, whereas Big Bony Boy and the Dark Knight are definitely tank focused, and the Banshee, of course, is stress focused. So they fill different roles, but they all fill the roles, I think, excellently, which is why I went ahead and landed them in A tier. Speaking of someone else with some damage focus, the Headhunter. Fantastic damage. The fact that he can't aim at anyone unless you build him a certain way, a little annoying. I love his mark ability, especially when it gets buffed where it removes armor and resistance. That's my favorite way to build him, personally. And I think it brings a lot to the table. I would be tempted to put him in A tier as well, but right now I really have to think, which one do I like better? Because I think they do fulfill a very similar role. The Ghoul or the Headhunter? And I think I like the Ghoul a lot more than I like the Headhunter. Because even if I build him in a way that he can target enemies, he has no sustain to speak of. And the fact that the Ghoul does have a lot of self-heal, a lot of ways to keep herself alive, but the Headhunter lacks, I think puts him just below. I think he does fit into a lot of teams. In fact, I am almost tempted to make like a B.5 tier for him, because I think he is like that close to being an A tier, but I think the Ghoul edges him out and is just a little bit better in almost every regard. The Infested. The Infested is interesting. He's very stress focused. He does have one attack if he gets moved to the front. Everything else though, stress, and he can also have some support on him. He can remove debuffs. He can there's one more, and now it's not coming to me. But he does have one more support. Oh, he has a stealth buff. That's what it is. He can make himself stronger, and he can remove debuffs from allies. All very good abilities. His stress ability is actually really nice, especially the 4x stress attack. If you buff that to the one that makes it so that it never misses, then you get someone down to 0 stress, and basically every turn you have 4 chances to give that character a heart attack. Obviously, not as useful outside of that. Outside of stress builds, I think the Banshee I like a little bit better, and here's why. The Banshee can move enemies around much more effectively, in my opinion, than the Infested can, because as far as I'm thinking right now, I don't think he has a single shuffle move, and the fact that the Banshee does gives her a lot more utility in a lot more areas than the Infested has. So because of that, I think that creates a solid barrier between A and B tier that the Infested just doesn't crawl over. Now, B doesn't stand for bad. I think all of these characters are perfectly serviceable. and could go into teams, but he's just not good enough. The Lich is next, and God, am I tempted to put Lich directly in the S tier, because you pair him with someone else who has either some self-sustain or some mana regen or some evasion, and then maybe one other class that has similar capabilities, and you just have them summon skeletons all day, and that's it. That's your team. Someone's gonna get close to dying, you sacrifice the skeleton, everyone gets healed, everyone's good to go. You put the skeleton in front. The Lich uses his move that hits 2 enemies and the friendly in front. Who cares? It's a skeleton. You're going to sacrifice him anyway. He's very unique the way that he doesn't care about his own minions. And he can also provide extremely powerful buffs to him. His Poison Cloud is actually a great stress move, especially paired with someone who can move enemies around. I really thought I was going to put him in A tier when I was like thinking about this list earlier, but I think he has to go in S tier. My only downside, every time I have a Lich, for some reason, enemies focus the hell out of him, and he's pretty damn squishy, but he hits like a truck. He has a lot of sustain when he uses his skeletons. If you put him in a team that doesn't use skeletons, he becomes a lot weaker. In fact, I almost want to, like, can I put 2 of them here? Probably not. I almost want to put another one for the Lich here, and have one in S tier, one in C tier, actually. If you didn't have a summon skeleton strategy with him, I think he actually drops way down, and I do think it actually might be down to C tier, because after that, he has a buff. He has the move that can attack just 1 enemy instead of 2, and then he won't hit the front line. And he has an ult that hurts everybody, which is not that great. He has a summon that you'll never use. And he has the Poison Cloud, which if he's in the back, he can't use, so he'd have to be at least in the 3rd position, which is kind of vulnerable to his squishy ass. So I think, actually, if you don't do a summon strategy, he drops way hard in the ranking. However, with a summon strategy, if you're using him properly, he does fit in S tier. This is going to be the one that I self-criticize myself on the most, because I think now the Bride fits into way many more teams than the Lich does, because again, with the Lich, you almost have to have that skeleton summon strategy. However, if you do have him in a team of 4, and you have one of them that's like the designated, this guy I sacrifice, I don't care, then he works in that team just as well. And I've done that. I've done that with, I think I've done that with the Infested, where I just have him in the team and I'm like, whatever. I've done that with the Bone Golem. Oh, they're tearing down my Golem. Time to sacrifice him and just put a skeleton in his place, and I'll build another Bone Golem later. Yeah, that works. So, yeah, I think I am going to keep him in S tier. The Lost Soul. I understand what Unfrozen's doing here with this class. She throws buffs to the enemies while doing damage, or stress, or etc., or debuffs as well. She throws heals and sustains to her friends, while also possibly doing damage to them. She has a lot of moves that have powerful effects, but powerful downsides. Love the idea of it. For the most part, makes for a terrible minion on a tier list. However, this is totally just in the confines of the tier list. She might be the only one hanging out in D tier, because anything that she does, someone else can do either just as effectively with no downsides, or not quite as effectively but without downsides. So the Lost Soul is just too gimmicky to fit in any other tier higher than the D tier. So that's where she's going to land. Just too gimmicky. The Mummy. I like the Mummy's wraps that can only be used from the back. The fact that they lower luck, actually, for certain enemies, having someone who can lower their crit chance is invaluable, and he fills that role. His stress damage is definitely good. I don't think it's as good as the Infested. It's really close, though, and if you can throw down debuffs, it actually becomes a lot better. And his utility, I think, is just below the Banshee. He does have a great move where he can remove all debuffs from the team and then heal himself with it. But I think it's great, but I don't think it's... Oh, it's really close. I don't think it's A tier great. Yeah, I think we're going to put him in B tier. The Shade. The Shade is interesting. The Shade has almost no direct attacks. In fact, the closest he has is a trap for direct damage. No, that's not true. He has the, I can't remember the name of it now, but it does damage based on how much stress is missing, which is also a pretty good move. But his utility, his support, is possibly up there with the best in the game. He can switch places with someone, throw down some evasion on him. Great move. He can make it so that anyone who attacks one of your guys gets hit back with stress damage. Great utility. Especially since it could pair well with, like, the Blood Phantasm, for example, or the Dampier. There's a lot of ways that he could fit into some very interesting teams. But my favorite use of him, of course, is just as a mana-generating machine with some self-sustain on the side if you want to go that route. I think he's really good. I do think he's probably A tier. If he had some kind of direct damage, I'd probably put him in S tier, but I don't think I can justify that. The Standard Skeleton, who stands steady and is ready to serve. I'm putting him in S tier. One, he's immune to buffs, which is bad, but he's also immune to all debuffs, which is fantastic. And making him the only one who has an inherent immunity to all debuffs. He has decent damage. He can ignore armor. He can use an amazing buff that synergizes so well with the Dark Knight that, honestly, if you pair them together, they're probably an S-tier team. And honestly, if the Dark Knight had a little bit more going for him, they'd probably be an S-tier pair up here. He has one stress attack that's not that great, but he can also buff up his own defense to make him even stronger. Plus, the summon ones from the Lich are stronger than your regular skeletons, so they're just even better. If there's an S+, summon skeleton might go in there, just because he's that good. I mean... And then, well, and let's not forget, he also has an interrupt stance, a knockback, and if you level him up that way, instead, a stun, which is amazing. Honestly, it's like the most straightforward stun in the game, and it's really good against the front row. I love the skeleton. I know he's supposed to be the most basic minion in the game, but he's awesome at what he does in almost every single way. The only thing that can make him better is if you could buff him, but it's, you know, it keeps him from being overpowered, I suppose. Although he's damn near it already. And he's also not like the tankiest build, but who cares? He's got so much more going for him. None of the S tier are tanky builds, you'll notice that. I do love the tanks, but I think the other ones just bring more utility. Oddly enough, also, none of them... the Bride doesn't really fit in with the other two as far as optimal teams, in my opinion, but whatever. The Black Widow. I like the Black Widow. I like the Black Widow's ult that makes it so that enemies can't move. There's a lot of utility in certain enemy groups with that ult. Works fantastically. Other ones, not so much. I mean, sometimes it doesn't bring anything to the table. But she has solid damage. The Venom's really cool. A really nice mechanic. She has a great sustain with that cocoon that also protects enemy or minions who are directly behind her. She has a lot going for her. But I feel like she's a frontliner without that frontliner sustainability that, say, the Dark Knight has or the Bone Golem has. She can work in the second position, probably in the third position just fine as well. But outside of that, I think she's just a little too risky. So I'm comparing her right now to the Headhunter in my mind. I know you can build her towards stress too, but I always build her toward damage. And compared to the Headhunter, I think she is like a tier below. Who themselves is a tier below the Ghoul. So I think I'm going to go ahead and put the Black Widow in the C tier. Again, I do love the idea of the class. There's a lot to like there, but given every minion above this tier, I can't think of one that I would want less than the Black Widow if I were building my own teams. The Vampire. Good sustain once you go ahead and use the ult. Solid damage, I would say. However, I've never found myself going, wow, this vampire is like an MVP on my team. She can move around a bit with a couple of her skills that let her move. But yeah, I'm not enthralled that much with the vampire. I think the Dampier is just better in almost, feels like almost every way than the vampire is. So I'm going to go ahead and put her a tier below into C tier. Okay, B tier is the most populated, which makes sense. That would be the average one. So I think I'm doing something slightly balanced here so far. Let's go ahead and take a look at the last two. The Wraith is... I love the Wraith, actually. Synergizes perfectly with the Banshee and the Bride of Iratus, because his ultimate shuffles all the enemies. He has a good magic attack with he actually, for someone who's mostly stress focused, has a good amount of damage on him as well. He has a lot of stress, as mentioned. His stress can give pushback. He has a decent self buff, although it doesn't do too much for me. His evasion ability is really good. I kind of wish it didn't move him back, but I mean, you can play around that by just targeting behind him if you want, or targeting where he is if you want to put the person behind you into a higher evasion stance. However, he is an excellent warrior, and I would say I'm going to put him equal with the Banshee in A tier, because other than being fairly squishy, he has armor, he has wards, or excuse me, he has blocks and wards, and those are just going to get stronger with the next update that Unfrozen is talking about. So I think he's A tier now, with potential for S tier going up when those blocks and wards become even stronger and can prevent crit damage. Yeah, he's a fantastic character with a lot. The only thing he's lacking is sustain, really. If he had any way to heal himself, he'd be kind of, I think he'd be kind of broken. I also think his buffs are a little lackluster. His self buff is definitely lackluster, but other than that one move, everything else is like really good in comparison. And then finally, we have old Zomboid here. Hey Zomboid, how you doing? Giving him a cannon, obviously, aesthetically, pretty damn cool. Not just building a neat man and sending him out there to die. I'm not super impressed by him, though. His cannonball is good damage, obviously. His bombardment is extremely fun. I prefer to build his powder in the trench loading so that he gains a little bit of block and ward every time he does it. Just give him a little bit of sustain. That way I can put him in the front. But even then, it's not super impressive. His buckshot does nothing for me, really. It's just, he doesn't have the damage to back up an attack that does 50% damage. The regular shot, which the name is escaping me right now, it's okay. It's not bad. The fact that it's magical damage, I think, is really neat. However, the only thing, literally the only thing keeping me from putting him down in C tier is the fact that he has that bomb. That bomb, when buffed toward magic damage, in my opinion, is the best damage over time move in the game. It's like fire for like 15 to 20 damage, and that's without actually like throwing more damage items on him and things like that. He has a lot of damage just with that move alone, and it hits 2 rows, and it can stack as well. So that makes him really good. I don't think he does anything better than A or S tier, though, other than that damage over time. Everyone who does damage up here does damage better. Everyone who does tanking, which I do think the zombie has a little bit of, with trench loading especially, everyone up here tanks a little bit better. He can be built towards stress if you build him a very specific way, by giving him a smoke bomb specifically, but it's not that great. I believe you can also up his cannonball to a version that stresses well. Yeah, you can. Which, again, is not that great. You have to build him specifically for that. And honestly, you're doing something very unique, which is maybe a bit admirable, if you're taking someone who by default does damage and building him into a stress build. Cool. Not good for my tier, though. So that is what I got right now in the tier list. You got the Bride, the Lich, and the Skeleton in S tier, and I stand by those 3. Again, if you don't use the Lich correctly, he drastically drops in tier, but if you're ready to sacrifice If you're ready to throw minions away into the meat grinder, then he is your best pick for helping facilitate that. Bride just does insane damage, just does really good mana regen when you build her that way. She makes herself stronger every turn if you decide to build her that way. She can work with shuffle teams. She works with so many different teams that it's really hard not to want to put the Bride in every single team. Standard Skeleton, fantastic buff with his mediocrity. Makes the Dark Knight amazing if you go ahead and buff him that way. Has decent damage himself, has some pretty good upgrades on him, can ignore armor, he can stun, he can interrupt stances, he can push enemies back. He has a lot going for him, and he has very little going against him other than the fact that you can't buff him. And let's be real, his health is not that great for tanking. But if you do have the tier 3 passive skill that lets you gain health as you save up Wrath, he could fit really well into that. In fact, I think that makes the Lich and the Skeleton seem very great as a team. Not so much with the Bride, because I would like to use that Wrath for that free crit. However, you know, for a lot of other teams, I think that passive regen is actually pretty good. I'm standing by S tier 100%. I'm standing by D tier 100% too. Only the Lost Soul just does not fit with the rest of the team at all. Really neat, gimmicky gameplay. If there was someone else who could absorb those buffs a little bit better, I think I'd like them more. Oh, or the debuffs, I should say. I know there are some. The Mummy could absorb debuffs on your own team. The Dark Knight could actually punish enemies stress-wise for those buffs. There are some teams that this would work well with, but they're all super gimmicky and they're not straightforward powerful. So that hurts your tier list. C tier, I think I want to stand by as well. A little bit shakier than S and D tier. The Vampire just never impressed me the way that I would think she would, and she's definitely a step down from the Dampier, which is where you're going to compare them, because of course. And the Black Widow is definitely a step down, in my opinion, from other primary damage dealers. Some decent utility in there, but other teams have better utility. And then in B tier, that's the biggest tier, so I think I did that about correctly. A tier, I will stand by. Banshee is super good, not good enough for S. In fact, no primary stressors in S tier, and Banshee is definitely the closest for that. Banshee and they're both in A tier, so of course. They're like right there, right close to it. And the Dark Knight, I kind of want to put him in S tier, but I feel like he would need something else damage-wise to put him in S tier. If he had something that was similar, that he could use in the front row to the Buckshot, I know when you put him in the 3rd or 4th position, he has a Holy Lance style move that can hit two enemies and move him forward. That's pretty neat, but you would need to basically pair him with a Shade to make that a reliable move. This is an interesting idea for a strategy, but not probably the first one I would go with, especially since if I have a Dark Knight, I want him paired with a Skeleton in most cases. Not all, but most of them. And in fact, pairing with a Skeleton and a Lich, ooh, you can make a strong Dark Knight with that, if you want. Anyway, that is my tier list. Feel free to let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Do the YouTube things. If you liked the video, you know, give a like, give a subscribe, you know, support me on Twitter, throw me a Patreon, whatever you want to do, to say, hey, this was neat, make more of it. And if you thought it was neat and I should make more, let me know. But that is, yeah, that's my tier list for Iratus, Lord of the Dead, current minion tier list, pre-new beta update. And we can visit them later to see if it actually changes post-beta update. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. Only way to find out is to tune in. Thanks again for watching this tier list. My name is Thet, and I will see you in the next video.